$250,000 was won with the design of this driver, which I might have been, well, wrong about. Over 4 years ago, there was a program, a series commissioned on the Golf Channel and very much put together by Wilson themselves. And the idea and concept of that program was to get hundreds of applications of amateur golf builders, designers, engineers, you name it, to come up with what they think will be a game changer in the driver market. And ever since the airing of that program, I have been waiting extremely patiently to try and test the $250,000 winner that it produced. Well, that can't be any better of a start, really, can it? So we're going to look at the price that you can get a hold of this driver for now, 4 years later, because it is quite rare trying to find them. Hence why it's taken me so long to make this video. But one thing I really realized when watching back the final episode of Driver versus Driver 2 is the points that these drivers were being judged on. And it's not necessarily what you would think. Throughout the series, it is quite obvious the bits that were making drivers stand out: aesthetics, sound, and then the launch and spin that driver was able to produce, which sums up our driver market in the current day very well. We know we can't get faster faces. Drivers have to be conforming to the USGA list, and that was all too apparent in the first series of Driver versus Driver, as the Triton driver, which won the first series, had to have some slight changes to make sure that it was conforming. So we are talking about very strict rules. So within those tight parameters, how much leeway, how much flexibility, and how much imagination can even people that aren't necessarily in the golf engineering industry on a day-to-day basis really have on the final outcome? Therefore, the point I'm trying to make is you've got a lot of drivers that have to be pretty similar amongst each other. Therefore, when we go to 2023, 2024, 2025, and they need to sound, they need to look, they need to feel, and they also need to produce very similar launch and spin numbers to everything else that's come out over the last few years to succeed, well then ultimately, aren't you better off trying to find an older model at a third of the price that still offers essentially all of that? Tell you what, very impressed with this. I actually get what they mean in terms of the sound of this driver, as it definitely sounds different to everything else I've tried. Now, initially, when I did my ranking video of the best all-time drivers, I actually put the Cortex at the very bottom of the list. And the main reason being is that the driver itself was extremely expensive when it first came out. And essentially, I said they were just riding on the hype, the marketing, the TV channel. Understandably so, as I imagine they were trying to recoup a lot of the costs of the driver in itself. It wouldn't have been cheap to put all of that on, as entertaining as it was. And again, I refer back to a few of the videos over the last couple of weeks of direct-to-consumer brands that purely just build the clubs and rely on word of mouth and social media to market it, versus the bigger companies that are spending millions on their marketing, millions on their tour bills, millions on all the extras, trying to gain that marketing advantage. So how much of the money is actually being spent on the driver, and how much of the money is actually spent on getting it out in the market? For a winter day, we're talking 5 degrees. That is long. I thought the first one was long. That was even better. And the launch and spin, even though I've got a regular flex shaft in this driver head, seems somewhat perfect for myself, as this is potentially maxing out my distance for my playing driver swing on the course, which goes to show that combination is everything. Let me explain. In the finale of the series, the pros got to test them. The Wilson Staff Tour pros got to test them side by side, the Roswell and the Cortex. And 2 things came up most: aesthetics, the way they like the look and sound of the driver, and number 2, launch and spin. Now, if you actually watch back the video, the Cortex was actually able to be swung faster than the Roswell on averages, probably because that added carbon into the driver itself. However, when you watch the pros hit it, swing it, and yes, there are some slight increases in club head speed here and there, But all they wanted to know was launch and spin. They wanted to feel confident over it, i.e. finding the fairway, and then making sure that the launch and spin is pretty much perfect, as you could swing a driver 5 miles an hour faster than your current one. But if you spin that ball at 3,000 or above, say goodbye to any extra distance. And it does get you thinking, especially the whole process in general. 100 applications and designs whittled down to the final few. How many drivers do we not see from the big brands? How many are scrapped at the last minute and not put into production? Because surely they can't just test the stealth driver. Surely they can't just test the Ping G430. There has to be other designs that are built, tested, tried, and then left on the cutting room floor. And it does make you wonder, especially from this, as both drivers in their own right looked, appeared, felt, sound, and pretty much did very similar to each other. How many times have we in the past been given the wrong driver? Maybe the Callaway Epic Flash shouldn't have been brought to the masses. Maybe the Ping G30 wasn't the right one. And there could have been some absolute worldy drivers for the average golfer that some person, some engineer, some board in a big company had just said, nah, let's go with design B. Let's not try that one. And it really makes you think about the golf manufacturing and designing element of our game. I've got the Reg Flex shaft and that weight's at the back. Imagine I had a stiff flex with the weight at the front. So let's talk about the superficial reasons why I don't think this driver took off, because from all I can gather, and I'll talk about the good and bad points of this driver in a minute, is a very good driver. Ultimately, brand loyalty is a thing. It can't be changed necessarily in a year, and definitely takes time. And ultimately, when I look at Wilson, especially the driver end, you're looking at that beginner, that forgiving driver, potentially lower end of the market. So retailing a driver in 2018 at $500, which is very much on the top end. In 2022, that's probably what we judge a driver at the top end being. But this was one of the most expensive drivers out, and it's going to take a lot for those better players, mid-range players, players that value their TaylorMade, Callaway, Ping, you name it, to automatically jump ship because they watched the TV series. I'll tell you what, first bad one of the day. Still sounded all right then. And obviously I'm only speculating and have no idea the amount of sales there were of the Cortex driver, but ultimately I feel if it was a huge success, the driver was incredibly profitable, the series did extremely well, well, there would be a driver versus driver 3 and a driver versus driver 4. And ultimately the driver is really good. You put a TaylorMade, a Ping, a Callaway logo on that, change the name, different color for 2023, everyone would go, what a great sounding driver, what a great forgiving driver, what a great high launching, low spinning driver, which just goes to show how much of our game is pure marketing. The best way I can describe this driver is if a TaylorMade M5 driver had a love child with the Cobra LTD Max, essentially this is what we get. I was actually very impressed with the overall sound and feel of this. Anything with a sliding track down the middle of it or all over it normally screams unforgiving, but I didn't feel like I had that with this. And again, I did have a regular flex shaft and it is set at 10.5 degrees. So of course I'm going to get quite a high ball flight. But again, the low spin element, I was actually quite surprised with, potentially contradicting the style that I normally see Wilson staff drivers in that terms of light. It was able to produce high launch and low spin even with this setup. So no wonder when pros or average golfers were picking it up, they actually were quite taken back with the kind of feel and ball flight that they were getting from it. And ultimately from these videos, I love to give you guys a bargain and what you can actually pick this up for. Now the supply is low, and I feel like that's because not many of them were produced, rather than everyone's bought them and just keeping them in the bag forever. But I would highly suggest putting in your save searches Cortex driver, because when one does pop up or goes to auction, they don't sell for that much money, i.e. £100 or $120 around that ballpark. The hard reality of this driver compared to your Ping, your Titleist, your Cobra, your Callaway, is that if you want a G Series or if you want a Titleist 917, there will be 40 to 50 different shaft, head, loft options out on the market, and you can find one at around £100, potentially cheaper than this, with all the right combinations to get that launch and spin, to get that all-important combination. Whereas with this, it's more of a collector's item, and you might get lucky finding the right shaft and loft type for you, but ultimately, as good as this driver is in terms of sound and performance, I think you're better off spending £100 on a driver that you can get suited to you, even in the second-hand market, opposed to something that was featured on the Golf Channel. Guys, thank you ever so much for watching this video, and if you like the idea of a luxurious iron set that's going for a pretty reasonable price, this video up here on the right-hand side. Catch you guys later.